Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to ICRM's monthly session. Today, here in Czech Republic, we are celebrating a very exciting day that's known as Fight for Democracy and Freedom Day, given what the Velvet Revolution back in 1989, which was peaceful and very successful. So, and of course, and we are very excited to have one very special guest to share with us how his year has been. And I believe we have also fellow colleagues from Ukraine joining us. Thank you very much. I believe this day has also great significance to you all, as well as you are all fighting for the same ideal that Václav Havel leading the Czechs to fight for 26 years ago. So today we have a panelist from USA, Guillermo Christensen, who was a former diplomat and has extensive experience in rebuilding post-war compliance in different states. And like I said, we are very honored to have Mr. Serhiy Derkach to share with us his vision and his plans for 2023, how he is going to lead his team moving forward. And last but not least, we have Ghizlane from France sharing with us her observation on how compliance has been affected because of what has been going on, stemming from the energy crisis, stemming from sanctions that has led to financial crisis this year. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over the floor to our panelists. Guillermo, Serhiy, and Ghizlane, the stage is yours.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ariana. Thank you very much. And I just want to say thank you for the immense effort you put into all of the successful events that you have hosted, that you've organized. I think you've done an incredible job, especially during COVID and now post-COVID, however one wants to describe this environment. But you've done an amazing job in pulling together fascinating discussions across the world. And I really look forward to returning to one of your events in person. That's when you and I first met, I think, in Amsterdam. Seems like a long time ago, but I'm very hopeful that will happen soon. So what I will do today is partially interject on my experience, but mostly what I would like to do is give an opportunity for Serhiy to give us insights into what surely must be one of the most challenging environments for a compliance team to be operating in, under attack by a very large military, seeing their infrastructure, seeing their cities reduced to rubble. And then also to give Ghizlane an opportunity to comment on that as well, but also to speak about the other challenge that we're all facing, which is not quite as violent and dire, but it's putting compliance teams around the globe under a lot of stress, because as we know, compliance is typically not a source of revenue or profit for companies, and is therefore one of the first things that people look to cut or reduce when there are stresses, which is understandable, of course. A bankrupt company doesn't really need compliance at the end of the day. So somewhere in between that, we have to find a happy medium. So I would say in light of today and the significance of the Velvet Revolution, a couple of personal notes. So I was finishing my undergraduate and starting my graduate degrees. So I'm that old when that revolution happened. And I had spent a lot of time in Germany, and I was in Berlin in part during the fall of the wall. I grew up prepared and educated, if you will, to expect that the Soviet Union would be there and that we would be spending all of our time in my old position as an intelligence officer, mostly being worried about the Soviet Union. And then the world changed, in a very short period of time. And it did so in a remarkably peaceful manner. So if we look back at what happened from 1989 to 1991 in Berlin, in Prague, in Moscow, where we had a revolution of sorts, we pulled through that entire period without significant violence. That's not to say there was no violence. And then a few years later, another episode of my life began, which was the war in Bosnia, which unfortunately was not a good transition from a Cold War conflict to a new world. And that was bloody, and that was very unfortunate. And one of the things that I have to say I'm very pessimistic and disappointed about in our world today is I thought that cities like Srebrenica, Vukovar, the massacres that happened there would be words we had remembered, and we wouldn't be repeating them in different places. And yet now we have many new cities in Ukraine that we've learned to associate with horrible deeds like that. And that, I think, is very disappointing. One would hope that we learn these lessons, but apparently, as the historians say, we're just doomed to repeat them, which is unfortunate. So with those kind of general comments, what I'd like to do is ask Ghizlane first and then Serhiy to introduce themselves. You obviously can find their bios and information, but I think that they can give you some context for why they're joining us today. And then I've got a range of issues and questions that we've discussed that we'll go into. Ghizlane will also be helping me with guiding this conversation. But just so you know, my current affiliation is I'm a lawyer and I'm a partner at a very large firm called K&L Gates, where I think we're about 1,800 lawyers around the world. And we have offices in 5 continents, 47 offices, as I understand it. I just joined a couple of months ago, so I'm still learning a lot about the place, but it is a wonderful place to practice law. And we also support and are involved in a lot of efforts in public international law. So I'm hopeful that one of the results of this conversation will be perhaps that there's some way that we can help Serhiy and his colleagues in what they're doing. So with that, Ghizlane, would you please introduce yourself and some comments today about the significance of the day would be, I think, very appropriate before we turn to our dear friend in Kiev.
Sure. Hello, everyone. So I'm Ghizlane. I'm a French, I'm the head of compliance. I have experience in Middle East and Africa. I've been working for 15 years in compliance, which includes sanctions, embargoes, and corruption, fraud, and GDPR. I work in implementation of programs and investigations. And today I am working for myself, so I'm a freelancer, helping my clients to set up the proper framework or helping them to understand what is wrong when we have huge red flags by controlling and auditing or testing if needed. And sometimes we have to go on the ground in some continents to understand, I would say, the environment of some of our future partners, to understand their reputation issues or may not have. So I'm very pleased to be here today. I would say that we had a very good conversation on these topics, which is sanction and embargo, that happened since last February, since Russia starting attacking Ukraine. And we saw some involvement, not only in the good thing, but the bad thing too. And one of it, I would like to refer of it today because it's very important, is that we were thinking that actually sanction sometimes works, sometimes it doesn't work. We had this discussion and we could have seen that many countries, like for example, Iran, which is one of the case, never worked. They had many sanctions and they're still under. And unfortunately, the partners and the business partners of those countries, they help them to find a way around. And today we can see that, for example, India, that is quite close of Russia, even though they're not taking any side, but they help them to open virtual accounts to make deals in rupees. So I think 9 accounts have been opened and agreed by the Reserve Bank of India. to help two large banks actually in Russians, VTbank and Sberbank, to help them to trade only in rupees. So we can see that actually they have still, I would say, in Asia, some support, and this support helps them to continue to grow, economically speaking. However, even though the world is against the violence, we can see that some countries have taken other side on the economic side. So I think that today compliance is a bit tricky, I would say, because the geopolitics is quite influencing what's happening today, even though Europe and US have been quite tackling by taking actions with sanctions and embargoes. We can see that today we are not the leader anymore, I would say, unfortunately, economically, and we have this kind of situation that happens in front of us that we saw that actually by, I will not say punishing them, but warning them with the sanctions that actually we disagree with the way of treating democracy and the invasion. We didn't, I believe, anticipate that some quite big economies today, like India, will facilitate still some transaction to go around, and that unfortunately is one of the power of the sanction is like reduced and decreased. So today, to fight democracy, it's not only I would say a fight of army and weapons and sanction embargo, but it has to be maybe a value that we all agree on it, and something that is much stronger than we used to think of it. Because actually having a big democracy and being a big, huge economy like today for India is not enough to say that we are aligned in the same values.
Thank you. So, Serhiy, welcome. I hope, I always ask my friends in Ukraine first, are you in a safe place? Are things okay for you right now? And then, of course, if you would please, you have a fascinating background, and I think as probably most people here have not had a chance to speak with you, would you please give us some of your, what has brought you to this place in the world of compliance? And then I think we can go into some of the questions that we had talked about.
Super. Thank you very much. When I'm right now answering the question, how are you? Usually I'm answering like I'm alive, which is good, and in one piece. So that's fine for me as of now. And you see today we have electricity. So just in case if I will be out disappearing, this is that we don't have electricity for some time, and then we need to switch on the generator. So I'll be out for 5 minutes, but hopefully I will be back, and hopefully actually we will be with electricity. Yeah, it's a kind of a challenging times. As for me, I'm right now the head of corruption prevention and detection department in the National Agency of Corruption Prevention. This is the specialized institution in Ukraine, which is responsible for actually formulating the state anti-corruption policy and its implementing, and the same work with the private sector in terms of building the system of like anti-corruption compliance system in all like state institutions, state-owned enterprises, local municipalities, and actually in private sector as well. So it's a huge mandate with lots of stuff to do. And right now, you can imagine this challenging time in the middle of the war. And it's kind of difficult for all of us, because we are fighting, we have our front from the state perspective, because as of our like military colleagues and soldiers are fighting on the front line, we have our own front. It's the state front, so we are trying to keep the state strong, because if there will be no strong institution, no strong state, there will be no economy, and then there will be no army actually. So from this perspective, we see ourselves as like helping Ukraine to like doing everything for the victory on our own front. So from my own experience, I've been working on the criminal investigation for some time, and then I've been working with the UN mission in Liberia, so where I actually started my international career with in the rule of law sector, supporting the country the same after the war. Never knew at that time that I will be at the same situation like my local colleagues at that time. So then I came back actually, and I found out from 2014 when the Russia actually started their invasion to Ukraine that I needed in Ukraine, and came back to support Ukraine specifically with the anti-corruption reform. And in 2014, we had a huge reform and in Ukraine, which was held, and we had like several anti-corruption, specialized anti-corruption institutions which were created. It's like National Anti-Corruption Bureau, its investigative body, prosecution office, and the High Anti-Corruption Court. It's like the whole chain of criminal justice for anti-corruption was created, which is actually good. It's absolutely independent and very professional one. So since 2014, I'm here in Ukraine helping to like building the capacity of these institutions. And 3 years I'm in this particular institution working with my mandate of bringing the anti-corruption compliance system on the higher level, which maybe I will speak a bit later. So this is, I think it's enough for introduction. Thank you very much.
Outstanding. And I think, you know, when I look back at what, again, history tries to teach us, if we don't learn, is wars and conflicts, and this should be not surprising to anyone, I think, create the conditions for tremendous corruption. There are shortages. All of the state institutions are under great pressure and difficulties to be able to combat, whether it's World War II or in the Balkans or any of these conflicts. You see a great eruption of a corrupt economy that surfaces from that time. And then the problem with that, of course, is when the war ends and Reconstruction begins, that economy can often overwhelm the good side of the economy. So I imagine that's an issue we can speak to and get into, because at the end of the day, the confidence of those who support Reconstruction is an important part of what will come. But I wonder if you might also, I would be interested to hear your perspective in terms of where your office was before the Russians invaded again. And I emphasize again, because they invaded your country in 2014. So, but before this latest invasion, what were your goals and objectives for your office, and what have you had to change because you're in a war now?
Absolutely. Actually we are continuing to do the work that we were doing before the war anyway, and our goals where the first thing was to adopt anti-corruption strategy for the whole country, and it was adopted this year during the war already, but it was prepared like a year ago. But our parliament was delaying with adopting this strategy. But right now, with the candidacy status for the European Union, we were, let's say, in the good words, forced to accelerate our efforts in terms of anti-corruption as well. So, which is good. And we have now a law as anti-corruption strategy, which says actually what kind of challenges with the corruption we have in Ukraine and what areas should be covered of economy and the public administration very precisely. So right now, actually the plan was to adopt this strategy and to work with the program, which is actually a part of the government act, actually to succeed with anti-corruption strategy. It's kind of a plan, like precise plan with activities and exact actors from the state institutions who should do what kind of activities to succeed with the anti-corruption strategy. So this plan is still in place, and the strategy was adopted hopefully, and right now we are preparing the anti-corruption program, and it will be sent by the end of the year to the government, and we're pretty sure that the government will adopt this plan, and we will be moving much faster with concrete actions on anti-corruption. But definitely, I mean, our work actually changed a bit, and it started to be more like changeable and difficult in this time because there are new challenges which came to Ukraine with the war in terms of corruption as well. So there are two areas actually which are kind of new for us in terms of corruption. It's humanitarian aid and recovery or reconstruction stuff, which we never actually had before, and now we need to, you know, to make our own risk assessment and then to generate some activities to mitigate these risks. And another point is actually about another needs which are arising on the daily basis, because our government is generating new rules, and usually it's kind of a like
think, and I hope it's not the case, that maybe the power went out. Or Serhiy, wait a minute or two. Yeah, let's give him a little bit of time to come back to us. And so, Ghizlane, if I may instead turn back to you. And I think one of the issues that, you know, every compliance team that I work with in the US, but certainly in Europe and around the world are struggling with is what is 2023 going to look like? There's no question that it's going to be a very challenging time for a lot of companies. I think here in the US, we're not sure whether the soft recession will be soft or whether there's a much harder one coming. But every company is under great pressure to reduce costs because of inflation and the environment. What do you see your partners, your clients trying to do in order to accommodate that pressure? You know, are they changing the way they do things? Or are they reprioritizing their efforts?
We do. I think we got.
Oh, Serhiy's back, I think. Yeah. Well, here, let's do this. While he gets his setup sorted out, why don't you go ahead and cover that, and then I'll turn back to Serhiy in a minute.
Sure. So in Europe, indeed, we have the recession coming, and the partners and my clients are quite worried on it. On the compliance side, I would say that what they are trying is to facilitate the job for the compliance officer in a way to implement more artificial intelligence. So the work that we used to do as a level 1, for example, for transaction monitoring, should be done by AI. That is one of examples. It can be for testing too. When you have to refer to the samples should be chosen by some criteria that you are implement, and the tool will give it to you, will provide for you the transaction that we should simplify. That is one way to cut the cost. The other way is that some companies that we used to work with in Europe that got a huge fine, had their monitoring and then finished the remediation plan. What happens usually that they try to cut costs by replacing the employees. So they used to work for compliance, but today there is less need because the remediation plan is done. They are trying to replace them for in other departments. That can be a second way. And the third way is to report compliance. So to focus on whatever is very, very important, and you can't negotiate with the regulator. On the other hand, whatever is like less, I would say there's a less watch, the regulator is less focus on it. Try to postpone to see how it will be for next year. Anyway, compliance matters in Europe and US. I think they are always very challenging and always coming. I mean, there's always a new directive. Recently, we had the whistleblowing directive. We have the 6AML coming. There are always new regulations, so they have to be prepared. But I think they are trying to prioritize And today, one of the prioritization is mainly on the Ukraine war. So trying to not work with anyone as under sanctions. So I think that financial crime is one of the priority, and corruption too, because it goes on both ways. It's like quite connected. It's very transversal.
Very good. And let's see. Serhiy, are you able to hear us? You are? Okay. So, your sound is not coming through, but you're not on mute. So, let's see. Try again.
Can you hear me right now?
Yep. Now that's good. Okay, good.
Sorry.
No, that's all right. So I think when you dropped off, you were speaking about the two kind of areas of priority as the legislation has moved through. And one thing that I wanted to just say is I think it's remarkable that in the middle of what you and your countrymen and women are going through, that you're adopting a law on anti-bribery and for compliance. It shows you're obviously thinking about the future, which is very, very commendable. But you were saying that you're kind of thinking forward on the reconstruction side, and so please keep going.
Yeah. So coming back to what I was trying to say actually about the two areas which are new for us, and but there are like two old schemes of corruption which are known in Ukraine, and the new challenges that we have with the war is that our government should decide on different areas on the daily basis, and changing this decision. So with this stuff, it's like very difficult, to get the right decision in place in a very short period of time, because it's not well thought decision. And usually with this decision, all the rules which were set before, usually they are simplified, because we need to quickly recover our country. So in terms of public procurement and other stuff, because for example, today we need fuel for the country, tomorrow we need energy. And so we don't have time, to go to the whole this procedure. So the government is actually cutting and simplifying the procedures, which actually leads to some sort of corruption and enhancing the risk of corruption in Ukraine. So here we are, as the Agency of Corruption Prevention, where we are standing and trying to balancing the system, saying okay, we need to simplify because we need to get it quickly, but we need to cut everything, all the rules, because then we will not have any actually measures to mitigate some sort of risks which are very high. And from this perspective, we have a good mandate in our agency that we are checking all the draft laws and all the acts of the government on the corruption. It's corruption law proofing of legislation. So all the draft acts of our government and all the laws which are coming to the parliament, firstly coming to our agency. So there we see the risks in these norms, in these acts, and then given the recommendations to our government and the parliament, which is good. Right now we are trying to work on every day. So if the act coming today, so we are trying to work with the act today, because tomorrow it can be voted in the parliament. It's really very quick procedure on law making right now in Ukraine because of the situation. So that's what we have right now in terms of strategic perspective. If you are going to a bit another perspective from the reconstruction and rebuilding, today we have in Ukraine, Kyiv International Economic Forum take place. And I was there in the morning, and the Minister of Economy mentioned that, for example, for the next year, the half of Ukrainian budget will be funded by all other countries or international funds or international organizations, half of the whole country budget. So you can imagine the amount of money which is coming to Ukraine. And for this, we need to be vigilant in terms of transparency and accountability, because there were no procedures set for this. There are procedures for the Ukrainian budget, but not about the money which are coming from the abroad. And the same thing with the too many humanitarian accounts which we have, and then how the state operates with this humanitarian aid. So what we are doing right now is that we are trying to be the part of this, creating the right procedures and transparent procedures for their actually receiving these funds from the international partners, and then actually the procedures, what the Ukraine will do with this funds, how the country will use these funds. And it's actually a difficult story because the same thing, like country want to use it like today. And we see that, okay, we need to create concrete reporting system, concrete and very precise accounting system for these funds. So it's a kind of a challenge because we never did it before. And this is kind of stuff that we are working with. And lastly, the thing is that our economy is like in the very, like say, bad situation right now. The business was relocated from the places where it was because we have occupied territories, we have shelling on a daily basis. So that's why many Ukrainian companies were moved to the western part of the country or even abroad. So what we are doing right now, actually, we are working with the private sector and also with the state-owned enterprises, actually to get them compliance system in place. Before in Ukraine, actually, this was our plan before the war, actually, but it was like long-term plan to work with all companies to raise the awareness of the good ethical and anti-corruption compliance practices in place, because there is no so much strict liability, like for example in France with SEPIN 2 or with the FCPA in States. So we don't have this kind of strict liability. But it comes to the companies when they are going to the global market, and now there is the time, because too many companies are removed to the another areas. So now they need to adhere to the norms that are in that countries. And we want actually to present Ukraine as the absolutely anti-corrupted country with the transparent business and transparent private sector. So our role actually is to bring the concrete methodology and instruments and tools and system in place from the country perspective. So, for example, at the beginning of this year, we set the model anti-corruption program, which should be used for the all state-owned enterprises and private companies. So they at least know how the anti-corruption program should be actually adopted in the company. What is the task from the tone from the top, from the leader's voice? What is how to work with the conflict of interest, presence, facilitation, payments, and all of this stuff, and internal investigations, and so on. So it's a big part of our work that we want not to punish the companies right now that they don't have effective anti-corruption system in place, but we want to give them the good international practices, and then actually to help them or to go to the global market or to work to operate in Ukraine, but to see for international partners to see that Ukraine is absolutely accountable country with the proper anti-corruption system, which is actually taking the best international practices. And here actually where we have a room for the support from international partners, for you guys like experts in the international compliance system, to bring in Ukraine good practices, to bring the tools in Ukraine, because we have our own stuff which we are building, but definitely we need to get a support. And this support is not necessarily money, it's the actual knowledge that you have that you can bring to Ukraine. And this is very important for us from the state perspective and from the private sector perspective to get these all practices in place. And the very last thing that also is very important right now for us, and this is the agencies our agencies is working with, is a whistleblowing. So just before the war, we had a new changes to the legislation, and we have a kind of a good protection for the whistleblowers in place in Ukraine. But this instrument is not very popular in Ukraine, from the even Soviet times, because from the Soviet times, there were no trust to the state, and it was never trust to the people around, saying that if you are reporting on something internally, you are a traitor. So it's very difficult to change mindset here in Ukraine, but that's what we are working with, and where we also can get the support internationally wise with the good practices, how the whistleblowers are protected, how the system can be built, how to change the mindset of people. So we have a really good cases already of whistleblowing protection, even in the high court. And we are, as the agency, specifically doing like everything in terms of whistleblowing, like from the formulating the state policy, how the law should be actually look like, and to the real physical protection of the whistleblower in the court. So, and this is very important nowadays, even though the people don't like to speak about corruption, because this is like internal problem. And now we have a bigger problem, which is war. And now we need to speak about Ukraine as the country which is in the crisis in the middle of the war and needs the support. But we want also actually to increase the topic about corruption within the Ukraine from the positive note that lots of stuff is going on with the anti-corruption measures from the state perspective and within the organizational perspective, that all state institutions and all the companies separately are working inside their own, to build very ethical and very anti-corruption community within these organizations. This is shortly, this is shortly about the stuff that we are doing. Can continue later if there are some questions, Guillermo.
Absolutely. No, and I think one area that I think would be interesting, certainly for me and maybe for Ghizlane, is what kind of assistance are you getting right now from outside of Ukraine in your work? Are you able to get some advice and some support from, say, the Department of Justice in the US, from the Commission in the EU? Are legal associations like groups of lawyers reaching out to help? And if not, certainly I know that I and probably Ghizlane as well could try to facilitate some more connections for you to be able to because I know there are a lot of people who are very keen to be able to help.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Actually, I'm happy to say that we have a support in our work. We are not alone, and we have like technical assistance projects in Ukraine from the US, USAID side, and from the European Union side, which are helping us with the experts if we need it. But still, that we need to help. We need to have help now, and because of the procedures what there are in the US system and the European system, it takes time for the tendering and for all of this stuff. So it's, if you are asking about some support today, hopefully we are getting it in the several months, which is actually good, but because we are still getting it. But it's definitely not enough. We have like so huge mandate and so many areas to be working with. So definitely we need to have a support from the like separate experts or the networks where we can get it. We are working with the International Bar Association, which actually help us with experts as well. And even the task force was created there. We spoke 2 weeks ago with the Department of Justice, with the CPA unit, with the David Last and colleagues, explaining how the compliance system in Ukraine is built and what can be done. So there we also like thinking about some sort of cooperation. We didn't have like concrete actions taking place, but I'm sure that there's a huge room for development and for the network. That the issue is, which is huge issue is in Ukraine, actually it's a capacity development of compliance officers, because we don't have like in Ukraine, we almost have no in Ukraine specialized like training centers or experts who are teaching on anti-corruption and not even anti-corruption, like in broad perspective, like compliance system. We have like 2 of them, but we have in Ukraine, for your understanding, 15,000 compliance officers. So, and most of them are working in the position less than 1 year. Why? Because this position in Ukraine is not very much popular. So if you are like a lawyer, then you are going to the compliance officers there, then you are thinking, oh, I will better go to operations, or I will better go to some law company, and so on and so forth. So we want from the state perspective to bring the reputation, like for the compliance on the higher level. And then we need to have like some sort of international support. What kind of training staff, what kind of materials can be used for capacity development of anti-corruption compliance officers in the country. And here we are trying to do what we can. We are creating online courses. We got several of them, but definitely the topic is huge. So from this side, it's really will be good to get some sort of certifications or whatever, like understanding how the compliance officers operating, how the compliance unit is operating, what is the task for the chief compliance officer, comparing to the, for example, internal control system, internal audit, internal security service, and so on and so forth. There are lots of questions to be answered, and there are no answers in Ukraine so far. So this is the kind of a topics where we can work later. And I want to thank all of you, that for bringing me here actually, and to give a chance to speak with you and get acquainted. And I hope anyway for the further cooperation, because really we are very positive in terms of like our work and the results of Ukraine, and we are positive on victory. So hopefully I will invite you all in a peaceful Ukraine where we can all work together for rebuilding the country. But the thing is that we cannot stop right now because of the war, because then this rebuilding process will last for much longer time. So right now we need to already to bring the business up. Already we need to rebuild our schools, hospitals, and everything what's going on in Ukraine. So we cannot wait by the end of the war. We need to work right now.
No, I think it's absolutely, at the end of the day, similar to a company, if you're not operating, there's no compliance that you need to do. So that's absolutely the case. It strikes me at one area that perhaps we could pick up in a future discussion or help you with is the experience around whistleblowing. Here in the US, we've been relying on whistleblowers in many different contexts. The Securities and Exchanges Commission has a very active program, has awarded enormous amounts of awards to whistleblowers for all kinds of interesting cases, but it's still a struggle. Most privately held companies and publicly held companies in the United States find it's difficult to maintain a whistleblower program consistently. There's a lot of challenges, and I think Ghizlane, as on the EU side, that becomes also more of a feature, which has not been the case. I think it might be an interesting opportunity to be able to exchange lessons learned and help Serhiy and his colleagues on that. And I just saw, I think someone just added a question. Yes, that's a very good question from Hassan about mentorship. So Hassan's question was, have you considered pairing up probably some mentors with some of your local compliance professionals, and I guess is there a way to be able to do that? Is there a vehicle for that?
This is a really great idea. That we never use it. I never heard that the private companies were using it. That we have like several companies which were sanctioned by the US. From the FCPA perspective. So that's another kind of mentorship which came to Ukrainian parts of the international companies. And I do know these companies because one of the huge company, communication company in Ukraine, one of the biggest one, it's the part of the Turkish company we own. And they were very happy with the mentorship, even though it was very painful for the company, in terms of the budget. But if there will be a possibility, to from the international colleagues to help with the sort of pro bono mentorship, because I'm not sure that Ukrainian companies can pay right now for anything at all. So from this perspective, we can have several pilot projects, because we are now already working with the several state-owned enterprises and the private companies which want actually to create very comprehensive compliance system in place in their companies. And we gave them our experience from the state perspective, and they absolutely will be happy to have some support from international colleagues. So from this perspective, I would say yes. This is really a good idea. Definitely, it's need to be spoken with the companies. How open they can be, how transparent they can be, because in terms of mentorship, I mean, you need to actually open to the colleagues some sort of information. But I'm pretty sure that in Ukraine, at least for the pilot project, and to present the good practices that I implemented specifically in Ukraine, not somewhere abroad, it will be a great proposal, and some of them will take it with our support from the state perspective as well.
No, that sounds good. Please.
If I may, we don't have to go through the confidential information. We can just work on scenario basis. It can be only a case. If that happened, how would you manage it? And then you can have a plan, an action plan with the controls and the procedures and how to reframe them, how to rewrite them, how to implement the controls, that we stay like quite macro vision, but still helps in terms of guidance.
Super. Yeah, can be done. Thanks. I mean, agree.
And Ariana, that might be something that maybe you could think about, if there's a way that you could bring together, kind of create a forum where compliance professionals outside of Ukraine could be partnered up with compliance officers in Ukraine, hopefully in similar industries, so that they have someone that they can consult with. And as Ghizlane was saying, it doesn't have to go into business confidential information, but rather, if you were dealing with this situation, how would you approach it? Or have you dealt with this situation? What did you learn from it? How could we do it differently? Things like that could be very, very helpful, I imagine.
I agree. Good idea. Thank you.
Good. Now, Serhiy, one of the things that I remember you mentioning when we spoke before this was that your new law requires, I don't know if it's all companies or certain companies, to have the compliance function of compliance officers. Am I remembering that correctly? And if so, could you describe how that will operate? Because that's not, that's something here in the US, it's a best practice, but it's not a requirement.
Okay, we have, like, in our law of corruption prevention, we have requirement in terms of public sector, like all state-owned enterprises, actually, all the private public companies, they should have in place comprehensive compliance system. So they do need to have like corruption risk assessment in place, anti-corruption program. They need to have anti-corruption unit or compliance officer, and so on and so forth. And I mean, we have a big, like huge public companies, which are like operating with the same rules as the private companies. So which is actually a good example for us how it should be operating in the best scenario. In terms of the private companies, we have a rule, an obligation for the companies who are tendering for the public in the public sector in the amount of money of 20 million hryvnia. It's about like I need to check, but it's 500,000, I think, US dollars. And more. So then these companies, it's mandatory for these companies to have like anti-corruption program in place, anti-corruption officer in place, and so on. But for the whole private sector, it's mandatory to conduct corruption risk assessment and to work with the whistleblowing. So this is the two main stuff which are it's obligatory. For sure, the company, it's the obligation of to the company actually to have a person who will deal with the anti-corruption compliance stuff. But it's not necessarily a specific unit of a specific team. Usually it's the legal department or legal unit who is like working with or in their like job description, it's written that they are also working with anti-corruption compliance. So it's enough for us. But to be honest with you, I mean, there is no strong liability rules for these companies who are not taking measures on corruption risk assessment and the whistleblowing stuff. So from this side, the same thing. We have a rule. We have a mandate in Ukraine. Our agency has a mandate in Ukraine to conduct inspections and then punish these companies. it's not like financial punishment. It's more of the order to actually to work with the law. And then if they are not implementing, then there is another administrative kind of a punishment for the company, but it's very, very small one. So the companies are not motivated. And the second thing is that the company don't want to use resources, for creating the compliance system. So usually they don't have internal capacity, so they need to pay for the external experts, and then to pay for the special position of compliance officer and so on. So usually for example, middle companies, they don't want to do a small and middle business. They don't want to do this. And our role from the state, we want actually to bring and to motivate companies and to give them as much tools and as much information and knowledge that they don't need external consultants, maybe on some narrow questions, but not to create very comprehensive systems. So if they have, they can hire a good person and with all necessary tools which are presented from the states and from the state, and then also from the maybe open sources where they can get knowledge or certifications. That will be pretty enough for us as the state to see that this company works with the corruption risk assessment, corruption risk assessment and the whistleblowing. So this is the main stuff that we are looking at.
Ghizlane, I wanted to give you an option to chime in also if you wanted to pick up on any of those or had another question.
Sure. When you say risk identification, are you trying to teach to those companies' legal department how to make a risk mapping, or is it another way that you are using? Which tool basically are you going through?
So, good question, actually. The thing is that we have like two separate regulations for the public organizations and private organizations. And for the public ones, there is obligation to use the methodology which is created by us, by the NACP, by our agency. So we formulated the methodology of corruption risk management, which is officially adopted with the Ministry of Justice as the part of Ukrainian legislation. So all the public institutions and companies, they should use this methodology to conduct corruption risk assessment. And it's based on the ISO 3130, risk management and other international standards. So it's like pretty comprehensive methodology. And what we are doing right now in terms of capacity development, so we are creating like materials in the plain language, not only to get methodology in place, but with the recommendations how this methodology should be used. What is risk register, how to conduct interviews, for example, what are the external stakeholders that you need to work with, and so on, and so what kind of trainings you need to conduct internally as the part of the risk mitigation and so on. So that's how this is the instrument that we are giving to the our private sector. But the thing is that this methodology is not unique. I mean, very broad. So it can be used for the private sector as well. And we are working now with several private companies, giving the open webinars where we are teaching how to do the risk assessment. If, for example, the company or legal department, they were never working with the risk assessment and they don't have a risk manager or compliance officer, so we are the ones who are teaching them. But we have 1,000 of companies in Ukraine, so our capacity is very much limited, to do this kind of trainings. So the only one way out that we have, from our perspective, that we have methodology in place, it's already adopted. Then we will give recommendations, and then we will prepare on the online course to easy learning. This is how we are seeing the way out. Definitely, it will be good if there will be some, as I mentioned to you, some external possibilities for the compliance officers to learn from the different training centers, which is not common in Ukraine, for the risk assessment or other mandated tasks for the usual mandated task for the compliance officer.
Thank you. I think that more than training or certification, I think compliance is more based on the experience and the work that you have done in some companies or on the field, on the ground. So you learn, I would say, slowly but surely. So it's mainly by discussing that we find solutions. Mainly, actually, solving problems in compliance is not only by regulation or webinar. It helps us by on the daily basis when we face a problem. How do we internalize this data in the tool? How do we manage that? How do we fix that? So I believe that we can help on that, and we'll find the proper forum to try to challenge you and to discuss with you to try to find the best way. Another question that I have actually, are you more focused on the government side than the private sector? Because in my experience, private sector is the gatekeeper of corruption and the government is just following. So how do you feel in Ukraine? Is it the same, or is it the government that gives the base and then the private sector goes along?
Good question, actually. Firstly, of course, we are very much focused on the public sector. This is our first priority because we need to actually to control how everything works within the state institutions. And we have huge now reform on the local level. So our local municipalities, they've got the huge budgets from the companies that are working in their areas, and this is the different regulations, because all of their taxes were going to the state budgets, and now all the taxes are going to the local budgets. And this is the challenge for Ukraine, because local municipalities, they were never working with this huge amount of money that are coming to their budgets, and they don't have good, precise regulations. And that's why also we have recommendations and we have obligations of the local municipalities to work with the compliance, to create compliance officers, to do risk assessment, and so on. And in Ukraine, we have 1,500 local municipalities. So it's also a huge number of the people that we need to work with. It's the mayors of the town, it's administration, it's compliance officers within these local municipalities. Then, of course, the sector of state-owned enterprises, because this is the state money, and we are very much responsible that this money will be used in the proper way, and the companies will be working transparently. And then, lastly, definitely we are given mainly the rules for the private sector, but we are not going deep in terms of how the private sector is working. And let's say best practices from the private sector, unfortunately, so far, they are not brought up, to the level of the state one. So basically, maybe some of the Ukrainian companies, they have good practices, but we don't know about them. So maybe they have good compliance system in place. We are trying now to bring the network of Ukrainian compliance officers in place, that to even though we see that compliance officers don't speak with each other much. There are small chunks of people that are connected, but there is no huge association of compliance officers. So we want to be the one who will be creating the network, and to bring the place where all the compliance officer can speak and exchange with their experience. And the same thing with state. We want to be the part of this network to get these practices in place. But right now, it's not going down from up. It's more from the state perspective. We are going out of the country. We are looking at the international practices, then bringing them to Ukraine, and then trying to put them in place. That's how it works so far.
Thank you for your insights. I think it's very important that the funds are well managed in the government and public side. However, maybe it's just a thought, but the money will be spent in the private sector. So obviously, the government's bodies and the employees that you have in your agency should try to figure it out how to control and ensure that the money that will be spent for the reconstruction and all the expenditure that you will have will be well spent, and you will have finally I would say, if it's a building, the building will be built, because that is, you have the source of the fund that will come, and that is you have control, because you know where is it coming from and where does it go. But then you have to ensure that it's well spent and where it should be.
Absolutely.
So I think at this point, since we are at the 9 o'clock here in DC and everyone else's time. I won't even try to calculate it. I want to say from my part, Serhiy, thank you very much for giving us of your time. Obviously, we wish you continued safety and success in your work. And I think everyone here would be very pleased to be able to help you in any other way that we can. And I hope we can continue some of those discussions. Ghizlane, thank you as well for joining us. And let me turn it back over to Ariana to close this out.
Thank you, Guillermo. Thank you, Serhiy, and thank you, Ghizlane. And well, this year has been an even harder year than the past 2 years. Never thought I would say that, but I have to say I have full admiration for everyone, and especially our fellow colleagues from Ukraine, that you guys are really hanging on. And Serhiy, thank you so much for your commitment as well. Of course, in December, as ICRM, we really gave thoughts on how to continue on, because things have been changing every day, but we don't want to, keep on changing our program. So next month, we're gonna have something more fun, which we all know is World Cup, and a lot of compliance issues have been coming out, with Netflix having the most recent documentary on the infamous FIFA compliance, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of compliance related topics we can talk about. So you're welcome to catch the match with me. And Serhiy, you're of course also invited. Together, ICRM is hosting a fundraising on 2nd of December. We are also hosting it virtually. I'll send a link to everyone to log onto Zoom, and this is the program. So the 2nd of December, that will be 6 p.m. for Serhiy. So those who can join us physically will have a Christmas market tour, but we will be playing games and watch the match. It's going to be Brazil versus Cameroon and Switzerland versus Serbia. One of the most exciting matches because it's the pre-knockout. We'll be playing the games, and many of us have been asking the games. It's gonna be the games available on FIFA webpage, and prizes to be won are of course also from FIFA webpage as well. So we will send out more details for 2nd of December, and we know that a lot of matches pre-knockout, so we will still be watching, but I wouldn't force anyone to join. But the knockout games, we can come together and watch it together. So we wish everyone a great day, and hopefully we'll enjoy football together. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.